I'm going to hand over to a previous IAPS president as well. So we have Tony Craig, who is representing the 90s for us, as he was a student in 97, 98. He's now head of the Social, Economic and Geographical Sciences Department at James Hutton Institute, which is a UK research organisation delivering fundamental and applied sciences to drive sustainable use of land and natural resources.
Thank you so much for the invite to speak today. I wasn't entirely sure what to say. Birgitta, I think, said send a title a week and a half ago. So I come up with this pretentious title, and I'm not really going to speak about that, but it was good to have a deadline. Then the next deadline appeared, which was send your presentation. And I had about 5 minutes before the deadline, so I'm afraid I put far too many words together. So I might just ignore it and just speak. I've only got 5 minutes now, or something like that. So as Sarah said, I'm head of department of the Department of Social, Economic and Geographical Sciences. And it's in the title there. That's an interdisciplinary department. And I feel quite privileged to be head of department of an interdisciplinary department, because it reminds me every day I'm not a psychologist. I'm a social scientist, and that's what we need to do. We need to deliver social science to the world to help make responsible policy decisions. So I thought I'd give a quick run through some of what happened next. I should say from the outset, and David might remember me, maybe you don't, when I was a student here, I started off probably quite disappointed with environmental psychology. I spent a lot of time whinging about things. David went on sabbatical. You were meant to be supervising my dissertation, and then you abandoned me. But I remember coming to your office and saying, I feel a bit disappointed with environmental psychology. I don't even know what it is. What is environmental psychology? And I remember sitting in your office and you saying, well, you're not the first person to say that to me. Let me just tell you, environmental psychology, it's what environmental psychologists do, and it really pissed me off. But here I am now, wearing the identities of an environmental psychologist. So thanks for that. So this was me. This is a photo, the only photograph I could find of me before I did the Masters. So just to give you a bit of a story of my academic career. I went to university originally as a bit of a geeky kid from the 80s who was interested in computers. I went to do physics and computer science because I was kind of into that kind of stuff. And what I did then, after about a year and a half, is I changed, because in Scotland you get the option of putting in an additional module and seeing what it's like. I put psychology in, and I thought, actually, I'm more a psychologist than a computer scientist. So I kind of enjoyed that. Got a degree in psychology, came down here because I was interested in environmental stuff. I thought, environment and psychology together, let's do that, let's see what it's like. And I didn't really research it before doing the Masters, to be honest, hence my slight disappointment at the time. So I then discovered what environmental psychology was, and then kind of chewed away for a few years of that in my head. I had no idea what to do with it. I ended up moving to Southampton because my girlfriend at the time was doing a housing course and a placement in Southampton. I got a job as an admin assistant in a primary school, having no idea what I was going to do with my life. I left. I moved to Aberdeen because that's where I did my undergraduate degree. And I was kind of like staying on people's sofas, not really knowing what to do with my life. So I didn't end like the master's course with a big plan of I'm going to become a really great environmental psychologist. I just left that behind thinking, I've no idea. I'll drift along for a while. And then my flatmate at the time, she said, she was worried about me. I was quite depressed. and she said, you need to get out of the house. You need to get out. She was studying at the art school. And she said, I think you should meet this guy, John Berry, lovely guy. And he'll give you time for a chat. So I went to have a chat with him. He made me a cup of tea. And I spent about 2 hours just having a chat about environmental psychology. It came back to me. I thought, I know something. I know something interesting to say. And he basically talked to me about art and architecture. And he gave me time. And he made me realize that there was interesting conversations to be had. There was interest there. There were people that were interested in talking about people-environment relationships that were not just people here in Surrey and not just people in psychology departments. And I left having had a nice cup of tea, and he said, come back. I'd like you to come back tomorrow if that's okay. There's a few people I want to have a chat with. So bless him, he went to the School of Architecture. He was in the art school. He went to the School of Architecture, rounded up a few people, and he said to them, I've just had an interesting chat with this guy. Can you create a job? In those days, it was possible to create jobs, you know? And they did. They created a job for me called a research project assistant. It was a made-up title because it was the lowest paid job that they could come up with. And I was incredibly grateful and have never looked back and never forgotten that. So then I got a job as like I say, initially a research project assistant, and then moved on to a whole number of different fixed-term contracts there at the Robert Gordon University. That's actually 2007, I got that wrong. And I never expected to be working in a school of architecture, but I drifted from one project to another based on funding. I learned to be a modern researcher, you know, which essentially meant becoming interested in things that I'd never thought about before. My first project was about sustainable wastewater treatment and sewage treatment issues and compost toilets. Never heard of any of that. I became interested in it. So I learned to become interested in problems in the world, if you like. Again, then projects funded about prefabrication, modular construction, housing, and then over time, I kind of developed a bit of confidence as a researcher, and I thought, well, maybe some of this methodology stuff that we talked about before, maybe that's the kind of stuff that could define me as a researcher. And I then allowed myself the time and space to just explore that a little bit. I was always interested in computer stuff. So I thought, well, the architects seem to be quite interested in modeling things using different computer simulation techniques. Maybe I'll hang around with them and do a bit of that. So that's what I ended up doing. We did various different projects. Some of it used this one here, using the Unreal computer games engine to kind of simulate real environments, but put them into a computer, allow people to walk around and do things like compare what it's like to just see what the environment is like when you're told to go a certain direction, or whether you can freely navigate the environment. So we spent loads of time just exploring these different quirky methodological techniques, but using the power of computers to kind of think, well, what could we ask that you couldn't do using the more old-fashioned techniques of environmental psychology, using periscopes in real environments and kind of cardboard model type kind of stuff. Though maybe computers can allow us to ask questions in a slightly different way. So that was my RGU years, if you like. And then what happened? Remarkably, in 2006 or 7, I saw a job advert at the Macaulay Land Use Research Institute for an environmental psychologist. Now that's peculiar in itself. Like, no one ever advertises jobs for environmental psychologists. So I saw it, and it was in Aberdeen, so I can't not apply for that. Applied, got the job, and then essentially spent a long time then becoming a researcher and growing my confidence as a researcher. Worked on a whole bunch of things. I have quite a literal interpretation of things that people say. So my boss at the time, Bill Slee, when I first started, he said, I'd like you to create 3 projects. Let's call them Project A, Project B, and Project C. And he didn't mean that, but I did call them Project A, Project B, and Project C. So for 5 years, that's the title of these projects. But the one that was the most successful was one called NESEM. That's the North East Scotland Energy Monitoring Project. And what we did is we basically just monitored electricity in people's houses. And then everyone started doing that, so we started it first. You know, but this in itself made me think. We were looking at what encourages people to use less energy compared to other households, et cetera, et cetera. But what really interested me about it was the temporality associated with electricity consumption. You know, this relates a little bit to the stuff that some sociologists like Elizabeth Shove and her bunch of people in Lancaster were doing years later about kind of how people are using electricity in a more dynamic way, not just seeing electricity consumption as a thing that is done. That isn't a behavior. Electricity consumption is a signal that comes from the behavior that has been done, if you like. So that allowed me to kind of like look at the literature about this, discovered time geography and all this kind of stuff. And the summary here is it kind of led me to a bunch of projects looking at using agent-based modeling. Now, agent-based modeling is a computational social simulation technique that essentially requires you to represent people and anything surrounding that person or people that you're investigating. So that's a seemingly simple thing, but an incredibly complex thing to do. And it leads me back to that thing I said before about what can computers allow us to do that we couldn't do otherwise. You know, agent-based modeling is a thing that I've spent probably the last 10, 15 years working on, trying to help computer scientists ask social science and fundamentally environmental psychological questions of how do people interact with their environment and how does the environment interact with people who are interacting with each other. That's what the technique allows you to do. And I've had a bunch of European projects. David's been involved in at least one of them projects, which was a great collaboration, the local project. And now I'm a manager. Now I'm the head of department, and that brings a whole bunch of other challenges. So my fascination with time and temporality and dynamic stuff, that's my environmental psychologist hat. Now I get to live as a manager and understand the constraints of actually being constrained by finance, space, and stuff like that. So this is what the environment was when I took over as the head of department, and during COVID just did it up and then grew the department. So we're huge now compared. When I started, there was 20 people there. Now there's 60. So what's happened though is they didn't give us more space. So COVID happened. Everyone started working at home, and then we ended up having to squeeze people in. And then I had to do the thing that I never, ever thought I would do, which is to basically say, desks will be shared. I still can't quite, it sticks in my throat, I can't quite believe that that's happened. And we've done lots of research for years, and including on the local project, about flexibility at work and what can you do if you're in a position that I'm ending up in now to make that kind of thing work. So I thought, well, I'll treat it like a research project. What could we do? What do we know from previous examples where it has worked? And the one thing that came up again and again and again was about territory and the importance of territory and equality. So there's a hierarchy. There was a very strong hierarchy in this space here. This is the crap space, basically. There's a toilet here. You know, along here, there was a bunch of cellular offices, and as there were along here, and the important person, the head of department, was right in the corner, there, corner, lots of windows and stuff like that. And what I realized is the only way it would work, the only way that we would even imagine something that is not just horrific for everyone, is for me to chuck myself out of that corner office and say, there is no space hierarchy, there's just space, and we will design the space together as a department. So I thought, well, let's just give it a go. No money to do this. You know, let's just set our constraints, which is a spatial plan, essentially. I'm not an architect. I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm not even getting an architect to help me. But I thought, well, let's just see if I've got them skills in the back of my mind to kind of do this. And that's the final environment that we've done. That's my old sofa from my flat from years back. These are plants that were donated by Baker Oil Tools because they were getting rid of a bunch of rental plants. This environment is incredibly cheap. And what it's come from, what it's come from is a whole bunch of just talking to people and having interesting conversations about stuff and what can be done. Now I spend my time managing kind of projects and programs rather than simply projects. I obsess about trying to kind of stop people going on about funding. It's not about funding, it's about doing research for funders, but it's not all, being an academic isn't all about chasing funding, and it needs to stop that kind of narrative. So time, that's what I spend most of my time going on about, opposing timesheets, opposing senior management who impose timesheets, et cetera, et cetera. That's the department. That's a bunch of us that are away day a couple of years back. There's a few more people now, and I've been told to stop by Sarah, so I'll stop. Thank you very much.